Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Insomniac Files, where reality and the dream world collide in a haze of mystery and suspense. Each night, we embark on a journey through the darkest corners of the subconscious, and tonight's tale is no exception. Prepare yourself for an adventure that will blur the line between sleep and waking, where nightmares manifest and secrets from the deepest recesses of your mind emerge. As we walk this path, know this: in the world of dreams, nothing is ever truly as it seems. The rain began just after midnight, slow, steady, as though the sky itself had agreed to whisper. On the 5th floor of St. Delphine's Hospital, the fluorescent lights hummed quietly, sterile and timeless, washing the hallway in a dull glow that made the silence feel deliberate. Detective Hauser stood at the far end, coat still damp, hair matted to his brow. He wasn't meant to be here. Not officially. Not at this hour. But the nurse on the phone had sounded unsure, and in Hauser's line of work, unsure usually meant something wasn't adding up. "Room 512, she had said. "The body's still warm, but the man was declared dead 6 hours ago." That sentence had replayed in his mind the entire drive across the city. He approached the door slowly, boots soft against linoleum. The sign above the room blinked faintly: isolation. No name on the patient's chart. No visitors logged. Just an empty page, and that always worried him more than a crowded one. Inside, the room was dim and cold. A body lay on the bed, young, male, early 30s. His skin was pale, with a bluish tint across the lips and fingertips. But his chest. Hauser watched closely. There was a flicker, barely perceptible, like the memory of breath. He stepped closer. "Ah, you came," a voice said softly from behind the curtain. Hauser didn't jump. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Gnomes," he said. "You always beat me to the strange ones." Dr. Herlock Gnomes appeared with the slow drift of someone half asleep and half awake, barefoot, naturally, with his collar turned inside out and his hair sticking up like static. He held a clipboard in one hand and a teacup in the other. "I've been speaking to him," Gnomes said. Hauser arched a brow. "He's dead." "Yes," Gnomes replied, sipping. "But he keeps reacting to Mozart." The room went still. Hauser stepped to the monitor beside the bed. "No brain activity," he muttered. "Flatline. No pulse. No respiration. And yet," Gnomes whispered, "his pupils dilated at the second movement of Symphony No. 40. Hauser narrowed his eyes. "You're suggesting reflex?" Gnomes smiled. "I'm suggesting something is still listening." The rain pressed harder against the window. In the silence that followed, a soft beep came from the EEG machine. Hauser froze. "You didn't turn it on?" Gnomes shook his head. The screen lit up. One single spike, like a breath through static. The beep hung in the air like a forgotten word, lingering just long enough to bend reality. Hauser stood still, watching the monitor, a single pulse, sharp and clean, carving through the flat line like a whisper through fog. Dr. Gnomes leaned in closer, expression unreadable. His eyes flicked back and forth across the wave, not with panic, but with fascination, like a scholar discovering a footnote at the end of a dead language. "One spike," Gnomes murmured. "Too clean to be electrical noise. Too precise to be involuntary." Hauser stepped toward the bed, watching the man's body as though it might twitch again. But the stillness returned. His hands lay folded, unmoving. His chest held no breath. Yet something remained. "What does it mean?" Hauser asked quietly. Gnomes didn't answer at first. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small velvet pouch, and from it, a slim silver tuning fork. With one gentle tap against the edge of the bed frame, he brought it to the patient's left ear. The fork hummed. The monitor spiked again. Hauser's breath caught. Gnome's face broke into a smile, not of joy, but of confirmation. Sound, he said. The vestibulocochlear nerve is reacting. Even post-mortem. Hauser frowned. That's impossible. The auditory nerve doesn't function in clinical death. It doesn't, Gnomes replied. Unless this isn't death, but something adjacent. He scribbled quickly into his notepad, muttering under his breath. Residual impulse? No. Too late for that. EG decay usually stabilizes within 10 minutes. This is 6 hours post-declaration. Hauser crossed his arms. You're telling me he's alive? No, Gnomes said without looking up. I'm telling you he's listening. A soft knock echoed from the doorway. A nurse stepped in, her voice low, apologetic. There's something strange in the autopsy request file, she said. I thought you should know. Hauser and Gnomes followed her to the ward terminal. The patient's name appeared at the top, Jonas R. Vale, 31. No prior admissions. No listed emergency contact. But under cause of death, the report read only one word. Pending. No physician had signed off. No time of death recorded. Yet the body had been wheeled from the elevator hours earlier, registered by 2 separate porters. That's not a clerical error, Hauser said, more to himself than anyone. It's an omission, Gnomes finished. And a deliberate one. Hauser glanced at the nurse. Who authorized the isolation? She hesitated. There's no record. The room was prepared by order, but the system won't say whose. A soft chill touched the back of Hauser's neck. Someone wanted him off the books. Gnomes turned to the monitor again. The line was flat once more. Silent. But the silence now felt different, not empty, but waiting. Then, another beep. Shorter this time. Fainter. As though the man had heard them, too. Gnome stepped forward, placing a gloved hand gently against the patient's jawline. No rigor, he said. No lividity. No pupil fixation. He turned to Hauser, voice lower now, as though speaking in a church. This man is neither alive, nor dead. Outside, the storm rolled across the sky with a low moan, like the world itself shifting in its sleep. And within the walls of room 512, time seemed to bend, not backward, nor forward, but inward. Hauser stared at the body again. And for the first time that night, he didn't feel like he was watching the dead. He felt like he was being watched by them. The hallway outside room 512 felt longer than before. As Hauser and Gnome stepped away from the monitor's lingering glow, the overhead lights dimmed for their scheduled nightly cycle, casting the hospital floor in softer, amber hues. Every door they passed hummed faintly behind them, ventilators, 4 pumps, slumbering machines that didn't sleep. Downstairs, in the restricted pathology suite, the hospital's autopsy chamber waited. Gnomes insisted they move the body themselves. I trust my hands more than any technicians tonight, he'd said, as they wheeled the gurney past the lift. Hauser didn't argue. The truth is, he didn't trust this building anymore, not tonight. Not after what they'd seen on the monitor. The suite was colder than expected, an artificial cold, more chilling than the rain outside. The room had a vaulted ceiling, dotted with surgical lights that blinked awake one by one, as if noticing their presence reluctantly. Gnomes began with the basics. Pupillary response absent. He muttered. Corneal clouding, none. Core temperature is 33 degrees Celsius. Hauser raised a brow. That's high. For a body left this long? Gnomes nodded, more to himself than anyone else. He's cooling far too slowly. Almost resisting it. They stripped back the sheet fully now, exposing the man's bare chest, arms, and legs. No surgical scars. No tattoos. One faint bruise near the left clavicle, barely yellowing. What's that? Hauser asked. Gnomes leaned closer, pulling out a magnifying lens. He hovered just above the skin. A puncture, he whispered. Small. Clean. He was injected with something. Drug overdose? No inflammation. No histamine response. Whatever it wasn't rejected. Meaning, the body accepted it. Hauser finished. Because it was still circulating, Gnomes confirmed. There was blood flow. He wheeled over a sterile tray and began drawing a sample from the subclavian vein. The needle slid in easily, too easily, and the syringe filled. Hauser stared. That's fresh blood. Gnomes held the tube up to the light. No clotting, he said. No separation. He placed it down and pulled another sample, this time from the cerebrospinal column. Again, liquid gold. Clear. Unclouded. Alive. Hauser's voice came quieter now. This man didn't die. Gnomes stared at the blood. No, he replied. He transitioned. They began the internal examination next. Gnomes worked slowly, reverently, narrating his way through organs that were too perfect. Lungs, no fluid, no embolism. Heart, no infarct, no scarring. Liver pristine. Brain. He paused, gently lifting the skullcap with a single, controlled movement. Is unusually dense. He leaned in. Hauser could see the way Gnome's pupils widened. There's layering here, he said. Almost like plaque, but it's not pathological. It's structural. The cortex has grown. Like a tumor? No, Gnome said. Like reinforcement. He took a scalpel and touched it to the prefrontal lobe. It didn't sink. Hauser stepped back. You're saying the brain has built itself armor. Gnomes finished. The overhead lights flickered. A low hum filled the room. And from the hallway outside, there came a slow, rhythmic tapping, like fingers against glass. They froze. Hauser reached for his phone. No signal. Gnome stood completely still, his hand still resting near the patient's temple. This man was part of something, he whispered. Something designed. Designed for what? Hauser asked. Gnomes looked down at the blood again. It's not that he didn't die, he said slowly. It's that he was never meant to stay dead. The tapping stopped. But something in the air remained, as if the room itself had exhaled. And somewhere behind them, on a monitor they hadn't turned on, a single line blinked again. One pulse. Like a voice. Waiting for a question. Dr. Gnome stood frozen, hand hovering just above the reinforced brain tissue. The lights above flickered again, not with urgency, but with the kind of slow, deliberate rhythm that mimicked thought, a hesitant heartbeat across the ceiling. He stepped back, removing his gloves carefully, as though the body might react to any sudden movement. Hauser watched the overhead monitor. The line blinked once more, another small, perfect spike. Always the same shape, always the same pause. This isn't random, he said quietly. No, Gnomes replied, already turning back to his tools. It's signaling. He moved toward the wall and retrieved a portable EM scanner, Not standard hospital equipment, but one of his own. A device patched together from pieces of an old defibrillator, a pet reader, and what might have once been a music amplifier. He held the wand over the exposed brain. Immediately, the scanner began to pulse in response. Electrical activity, he murmured. Localized in the thalamus, basal ganglia, and here. He pointed to the hippocampus. The seat of memory, Hauser said. Gnomes nodded slowly. And something else. See these spikes? They're cycling every 28 seconds. Not milliseconds. Seconds. That's deliberate, Hauser whispered. Too slow to be organic, Gnomes added. Too regular to be decay. He moved to the console, translating the spikes into digital readout. A string of numbers began to appear across the screen. Then letters. Then full words. The monitor blinked. I was chosen. Hauser took a slow step back. The room seemed to grow colder, but not from the air. From within. Gnomes zoomed in on the data string. This is a signal nested in neurosynaptic cycles, he said. The brain is not just storing data. It's transmitting it. To whom? Hauser asked. To anyone listening, Gnomes said. To whatever made him. The words disappeared. A new set took its place. Test failed. The word test echoed in Hauser's head long after the monitor went dark. Gnomes continued recording every pattern, translating spikes into visual pulses, mapping each one against known neuropathologies. But none of the templates matched. This wasn't stroke. Not seizure. Not psychosis. This isn't pathology, Gnome said softly. This is architecture. He held up a transparent slide from the brain scan, overlaying it with a neurodevelopmental map, one he had memorized from years of studying abnormal cortical layering. You see this ridge? He said, pointing. It shouldn't be here. This is a sulcal ridge, but it formed in the wrong hemisphere. Could be a genetic abnormality, Hauser suggested. Gnome shook his head. It's not congenital, he said. It's engineered. He reached into his case and removed a folder, thick, sealed, and labeled only with an old NHS project tag, VSBN 001. Hauser read the line beneath the code. Vespertine Cognitive Research Initiative. Top secret, Gnomes explained. Discontinued 5 years ago. Officially. Hauser scanned the page. Says here the program aimed to map and simulate lucid consciousness during the final moments of life. Terminal patients, Gnomes added. Hooked to imaging machines, monitored during death. They weren't just watching the process, they were interfering. Hauser's throat tightened. You think Jonas Vale was one of them? Gnomes pulled out a single photo. Jonas, younger, smiling. But the eyes already looked somewhere else. He was the only one who survived the initial phase, Gnomes said. And then disappeared. Hauser glanced at the autopsy slab. He didn't disappear, he muttered. He was archived. Gnomes nodded. And now, something's trying to restore him. They reviewed the hospital logs again, focusing on room 512. Something about the number had been bothering Gnomes, not the digits themselves, but the repetition. Over the last year, room 512 had been occupied 6 times. Each patient had been admitted under false credentials. Each had died within 3 days. Where are the records? Hauser asked. Buried, Gnomes replied. But the room keeps logging power spikes every night at precisely 2:14 a.m. Tonight's time of reactivation, Hauser said. Gnome stared at the timestamp. It's a repeating signal. Room 512 isn't just a room, it's a receiver. He retrieved a spectrometer, aiming it at the walls during the next scan cycle. Frequency 512 Hz. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, inaudible to the ear, but not to the mind. Low-band neural resonance, Gnomes whispered. It's the same tone used during early God helmet trials. Artificially induced spiritual sensation. Perception of a presence. You're saying this room was tuned? Hauser said. Gnomes nodded. And whoever used it was trying to summon something back. Hauser looked at the empty bed. I think they succeeded. Back in the pathology lab, Gnomes performed a final test. He retrieved the blood sample taken earlier, the one that refused to clot, and exposed it to varying oxygen levels inside a pressure chamber. He expected normal results. Instead, the blood glowed faintly under ultraviolet light, a shimmer just beneath the surface. Hauser stepped closer. Explain that. Gnomes turned slowly. The hemoglobin is modified, he said. There's a protein sequence in here I've never seen. It binds to oxygen, but doesn't release it. Meaning? This blood isn't designed for respiration, Gnomes said. It's designed for preservation. Hauser blinked. You mean? Exactly, Gnomes whispered. It's like embalming fluid that still thinks it's alive. Hauser felt the weight of the mystery pressing down again, not like a hammer, but like fog. What kind of research does that? Gnomes stared down at the sample, the shimmer fading. The kind that doesn't want to lose a subject, he said. Then he added, or a soul. The hospital's security logs recorded static interference on 2 cameras, one in room 512, and the other in the hallway outside neonatal intensive care. Odd pair, Hauser said, reviewing the footage. Gnomes was silent. Then he pulled up another pattern, one from the EEG monitor, one from the wall interference, and one from the spectrometer. He aligned them. They matched. Exactly. This is a broadcast, he said. A cyclic resonance of neurofrequency across isolated zones. You mean someone's transmitting thoughts? Hauser asked. Gnomes didn't look up. I mean, Jonas Vale was never the only one, he said. And these frequencies. He paused, rotating the spectrogram on screen. They form a grid. Across rooms. Across people. Hauser narrowed his eyes. A hospital-wide array. Gnomes finally looked up. They've been using the patients as nodes. And the ones who fail? Gnomes turned back to the screen. Are the ones who wake up. St. Delphine's hospital didn't creak, it didn't groan, it hummed. Subtle. Constant. Low. But now, Gnomes and Hauser heard that hum differently. No longer background ambience, but the faint residue of something structured, an invisible current stitched through steel beams and concrete bones. They sat in the security room now, bathed in the blue light of multiple monitors. The feeds showed every hallway, every ward, and 2, marked with red timestamps, flickered with static interference in the same rhythmic loop. Room 512. And the NICU, neonatal intensive care. Gnomes adjusted the gain on his frequency reader. The hum grew sharper. 512 Hz, he confirmed. The same frequency embedded in Jonas Vale's brainwaves. The same signal encoded in the wall of his isolation room. Hauser leaned closer to the screen. Why the NICU? Gnomes didn't answer right away. Instead, he scanned the hospital map and overlaid both locations. His hands moved like a cartographer rediscovering a forgotten coastline. There, he said finally. Draw a line between room 512 and NICU. Now add the other incidents. 6 patient deaths, 3 without cause, all in rooms along this diagonal. Hauser followed the path with his eyes. It forms a pattern. Gnomes nodded. A neural net. They both sat still. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the glass. You're saying the hospital itself is part of it? Hauser murmured. No, Gnomes corrected. I'm saying someone turned the hospital into it. He moved to the whiteboard, drawing out a simple schematic, patients as nodes, each connected by time of death and spike activity. Some rooms went dark after a few hours, others stayed active for days. But the signals always passed through room 512. Hauser studied the dates. All 6 incidents happened just after 2 a.m. He said, each spike begins there, then flows outward. Gnomes drew a line from the EEG reading back to the NICU feed. The NICU receives the last wave, he said. But no deaths occurred there. Only interruptions. Pauses in breathing, spontaneous desaturation. But all of the infants survived. Meaning they're not failing. Hauser said. They're resisting. Gnomes looked back at him, the pieces aligning. Because they haven't developed stable cortical barriers yet, he said. Their brains are still plastic, unformed. They absorb, but don't replicate. They're immune. Gnomes stepped away from the board. Which means, he added slowly, someone has been studying them, as part of the control. Hauser clenched his jaw. You think someone inside the hospital is still running this? I don't think, Gnomes said. I know. He walked over to the file cabinet. Opened the old, creaking drawer marked Confidential Archive, Research D. He withdrew one slim, weathered folder. On the cover, VSBN 001 Vespertine Neurometric Interface Project. And beneath that, Authorized Supervisor, Drive S. Halden. Hauser read the name slowly. That's the hospital's chief of medicine. Gnomes nodded, eyes heavy. And the architect of the entire signal grid. They found Dr. Halden's office dark, not in the way of switched-off lights, but in the way of unspoken things. The overhead fluorescence glowed faintly behind frosted glass, but inside, silence, and the faint smell of mothballs and alcohol swabs. The walls were too clean. A calendar from last year still hung untouched beside a whiteboard that had been wiped one too many times. Gnomes moved softly, scanning bookshelves, testing drawers, not speaking. Hauser stood by the door, arms crossed, as if watching over a crime scene before it was declared one. The desk held only a single folder, rubber-banded shut, labeled in neat handwriting, Continuation Protocols. Gnomes untied the band carefully, revealing a sheaf of documents, typed, printed, handwritten, all in Halden's hand. Page after page detailed the Vespertine initiative, but not as a terminated experiment. These were progress notes. Each entry was dated within the last 2 years. Hauser leaned in, reading silently. Subject 7 has shown consistent preservation of higher-order neural functions at subthreshold temperatures. Implantation complete. Testing for ambient recall pending. Patient 512 did not resist calibration. Signal stable. Duration, 31 hours. Gnomes tapped one line near the margin. Signal stabilized by NICU resonance field. Infants viable. Cortical mirror effect confirmed. Hauser turned. They're using newborns to amplify the signal. Or dampen it, Gnomes replied. Unformed brains don't resist the same way. They echo cleanly, like wet plaster taking the shape of whatever's pressed into it. They kept flipping. The final entry was dated 3 days ago. Vault 0 will be prepared. Subject 512 exhibits strong cortical retention. If cognitive recall is successful, transfer begins. Hauser's eyes narrowed. Transfer? Gnome stepped back. They weren't just archiving him, he said. They were moving him. Into Vu? There was no answer in the room. Only silence. And the cold hum of something waking up beneath it. The lower levels of St. Delphine's were never meant for patients. Sub-basement corridors, built in the 60s, reinforced with lead lining, repurposed from old storage wings into something colder, something secret. They descended together, badge access overridden, motion sensors blinking in faint red pulses. The walls here were thicker. No windows. No noise. Just the echo of footsteps across tile that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Vault 0 was buried beneath Operating Theater D. The door wasn't marked, just steel, smooth and seamless, with a single retinal scanner beside it. The pad blinked to life as Gnomes approached. "What now?" Hauser asked. Gnomes removed a small case from his coat. Inside, a vial of vitreous fluid, extracted from Jonas Vale during the autopsy. He pipetted one drop onto the lens. The door clicked. Opened. Inside, cold blue light. And silence so complete, it felt wrong. The room was long, narrow, lined with 6 translucent sarcophagus-like chambers, sealed pods, glowing faintly from within. 5 of them were empty. The 6th held something. Someone. It was Jonas Vale. But younger. Breathing. Eyes closed. No IVs. No monitors. Just a bare sensor cap across his scalp. Gnome stepped forward, almost reverently. "They did it," he whispered. "They didn't preserve his body. They copied it." Hauser stared. "A clone?" Gnomes nodded. "Or a vessel. This is where they plan to move the signal. The stored resonance pattern, from the original brain, injected here." Hauser moved to the console. The interface was unlocked. It showed a timer. Transference in 4 hours 11 minutes. "This is an automated cycle," Hauser said. "Whoever started it doesn't need to be present for it to finish. But someone had to begin it," Gnomes replied. "And they left it running." He opened a log. The last entry read, "Halden Project Full Circle. Subject 512 proved ideal. Vespertine cycle now irreversible." Gnomes turned toward the pod, voice barely a whisper. "They've built a way to make death optional." They didn't speak on the elevator ride up. The silence between them was heavy now, no longer theoretical, no longer a riddle to be unraveled in safety. The implications of what they'd seen were too large to fit neatly in speech. Hauser watched the floor numbers blink upward, slowly, while Gnome stood motionless, arms folded, gaze locked on the reflection in the elevator's polished steel. Outside, the wind had shifted. Storm clouds pressed down over the city, but the rain held back, as if suspended, as if even the sky were waiting. Back in the ICU, the bed where Jonas Vale had once been laid was now empty. The sheets were untouched. The room spotless. But the faint hum was still there, the 512 Hz frequency, soft but constant, embedded in the wall behind the headboard like a memory that refused to fade. Gnomes ran a palm scanner over the mattress. "Residual electromagnetic signature," he murmured. "Still warm. You think someone moved him?" "No," Gnomes replied. "I think someone moved through him." Hauser didn't flinch. "What do you mean?" "The process may have started earlier than we thought," Gnomes said. "The death we witnessed might not have been the end, but the beginning." He tapped into the server and pulled the most recent EG log, encrypted, hidden beneath a false data shell. It took a minute, but then the file opened. And they saw it. A full neural waveform, mapped, complete, stable. Jonas Vale's mind. Preserved. In motion. This was taken just before the autopsy, Gnomes whispered. They mapped him while he was dead, storing consciousness like a hard drive. But why him? Hauser asked. Gnomes considered. Because Jonas didn't die by accident. He volunteered. Hauser turned. For what? Gnomes looked back at the screen. For permanence. The lab beneath radiology held one of the hospital's oldest secrets, a forgotten technology from the early days of the Vespertine Initiative, neural glass. Sheets of micro-etched silicon, designed to store patterns of brainwave resonance in crystal format, like grooves on a vinyl record. Except these grooves didn't play music. They played memory. Gnomes had found the reference in Holden's notes, buried beneath layers of research logs, a mention of memory echo containment. The lab was cold, unused, a time capsule of discarded genius. But when they switched on the lights, the shelving units revealed row after row of thin, rectangular panels, smooth, clear, humming faintly beneath their cases. Each was labeled by date and name. Many were anonymous, but one caught Hauser's eye. 512A. He picked it up carefully. What do we do with this? He asked. Read it, Gnomes said. The grooves aren't just physical. They're optical. You scan the light through them, and the pattern begins. He activated the reader. A projection lit up before them, not a video, not a recording, but a neural echo. A memory reconstituted as sensation. Jonas Vale, age 8, sitting in a field of grass, wind over his shoulders, sun through his eyelids. No voice. Just warmth. Then cold. Lights. Screaming. A hand over his mouth. The scene froze. Hauser stepped back. What was that? Trauma lock, Gnomes said. Memories stored during high cortisol states embed deepest. Whoever built this, they used trauma to anchor personality. And now they're using it to rebuild him, Hauser murmured. Or worse, Gnomes said. To repeat him. As night settled in across the hospital's upper floors, Hauser and Gnomes returned to the NICU. Not for evidence, but for silence. The soft beeping of heart monitors, the occasional hiss of oxygen valves, and the dim lights cast in gold. This was as close to sacred ground as St. Delphine's could offer. Gnomes knelt beside the isolation crib labeled Infant 12B, a premature child, barely larger than a forearm, eyes closed, chest fluttering in delicate rhythm. She's absorbing the signal, Gnomes whispered. I can see it in the EEG trace. Slight mimicking of the 512 pulse. But she's not reacting, Hauser said. Not like the adults, Gnomes agreed. She doesn't resist. She coexists. He tapped into the live scan. The baby's brainwaves flowed smoothly, no spikes, no static. She's mirroring the signal, reflecting it, but not replicating. Hauser leaned against the wall. You think she's the key? Gnomes looked up. I think she's the Eureka. They stood at the edge of the NICU like men observing a living cathedral. Hauser remained silent, hands folded, while Gnomes moved in slow circles around the crib marked 12B. The infant's breathing was steady now, shallower than a sigh, lighter than the wind itself, but steady. The room around her was full of machines, tubes, and precision-crafted equipment, but it all felt secondary to the rhythm in her chest. On the monitor beside her, Gnomes watched the low-frequency waves repeat. 512 Hz, perfectly mirrored, gently bouncing against the soft curvature of a barely formed cortex. Her mind is like clean glass, he whispered, reflecting everything and holding on to nothing. Hauser stepped forward. She's showing the same pulses as Jonas, but not the same consequences. No cortical strain. No elevated cortisol. No vasospasm. She's absorbing the waveform without initiating any kind of autonomic reaction, Gnomes said. She is neutral. Hauser tilted his head. You called her the Eureka. Gnomes nodded. She represents a version of the brain unconditioned by identity, he said. No memory, no bias. No trauma imprint. The signal moves through her, but it doesn't stick. He knelt again. And if we can trace how she neutralizes it, we may be able to reverse what's been done to Jonas. A nurse entered briefly, eyes weary from the long shift. She nodded softly, unaware of the magnitude unspooling in her ward. Gnome stood slowly, brushing the dust from his knees. We need to find the imprint's source, he said. Whatever broadcast the original resonance, it still exists. The hospital grid is only a reflection of a deeper transmitter. And you think Halden built it? Hauser asked. No, Gnomes replied. I think Halden found it. Records deeper in the archive revealed a subdirectory Hauser hadn't seen before. Access restricted by biometric cipher, not tied to any current staff profile. Gnomes bypassed it with an artificial fingerprint patch, one harvested from the glass in Halden's office drawer. The files were old. Scanned paper sheets. Handwritten notes. Schematics for something called Project Vespertine, Stage 0. Blueprints revealed a wing beneath the hospital, not just a sublevel, but a pre-foundation chamber sealed during early construction. It had no designation, no medical use, but the file labeled it the quiet room. Gnomes studied the schematics, tracing the wiring. The room had power, its own generator, no internet access, no patient records, but a dedicated EEG loop. Jonas didn't come from here, Gnomes said, but the signal did. Hauser folded the page carefully. And if the NICU is the reflection, he said, then this is the source. They found the stairwell hidden behind a panel beneath the boiler unit. It was dusty, untouched. The door groaned open, not locked, just forgotten. Inside, darkness. And silence. The kind that presses inward, not out. The hallway sloped down in a spiral, cold stone beneath their feet, like stepping through someone else's memory. At the end, a door of pale glass, covered in frost. Beyond it, the quiet room. A single bed. A central monitor. And a chair beside it, occupied. Hauser's breath caught. It was Halden, but older. Frilier. Sleeping with eyes wide open. Gnome stepped close. He's not breathing, he said. Hauser checked the pulse. Nothing. But the EEG glowed bright on the wall. Brain activity, high. Consistent. Looping. He's thinking, Gnomes whispered. Without a body, Hauser finished. Drive S. Halden sat perfectly still, bones sunken beneath skin, eyes half-lidded like a marionette left mid-performance. Tubes traced gently from beneath his collarbone, trailing back into the wall, not for oxygen or fluids, but for data. Gnomes moved carefully, reverently, examining the connectors. These weren't standard medical lines. They were direct cortical taps, neural siphons, not for healing, but for replication. He accessed the wall-mounted interface. The system was ancient, coded in a language used during the early neuromapping trials. Still active. Still live. On screen, a looping neural signature. His consciousness was digitized, Gnomes said. That's what Project Vespertine was really about. But he's not dead, Hauser said. No, Gnomes replied. He's in recursive playback. Memory held in constant motion. The console screen changed. Waveform alignment. It pulsed, matching perfectly with the frequency in room 512. Hauser stared. He's the origin, or the echo of the origin, Gnomes said. This loop is being cast into the hospital above. Reflected, mirrored, echoed, and each patient acts as a temporary vessel. He ran a line comparison. The signal that began with Halden, he said, was refined through Jonas Vale. Vale became the filter, Hauser said. Yes, Gnomes said. They removed Halden's flaws by rewriting him into younger minds. Hauser's eyes darkened. They've been erasing people to improve one. Gnomes nodded. And Jonas wasn't the first. Gnomes scoured the older records embedded in the quiet room's server. 5 failed subjects before Jonas. All terminal patients. All volunteers. But none lasted beyond 48 hours after activation. The signal consumed them, rewrote them until the host collapsed. Neural inflammation. Cardiovascular shutdown. Identity death. He located a folder labeled Threshold Testing, 12B. Subject 12B. Gnomes whispered. That's the infant in the NICU. Hauser leaned in. They brought the signal into a newborn. They didn't activate it, Gnomes said. They observed its limit. The scan showed wave suppression. The infant's cortex absorbed the frequency, but it never reacted. She's rejecting the identity layer, Gnomes said. She mirrors the rhythm, but not the imprint. She doesn't become the signal, Hauser said. She passes through it. Gnomes sat back slowly, eyes wide. That's the answer. What is? We reverse the polarity of the signal using her brain's feedback loop, Gnomes explained. We inject the counter wave into Jonas's cloned cortex. And if it works, he forgets everything, Gnomes said. The identity wipes clean. But he lives. Hauser stepped back, silent for a long moment. And if it fails? Gnomes looked down. He takes Halden's place. They initiated the counterwave at midnight. Hauser stood outside the chamber as Gnomes connected the infant's mirrored EG output into a buffered relay, one that fed into the clone's active signal pathway. Carefully, he aligned the neurofrequency generator. The tone hummed, faint and pure, a single note stretched like a thread between minds. The clone of Jonas Vale remained unconscious. Still. No rise of breath. No twitch of hand. Gnomes activated the reversal. The room dimmed. A low-frequency beat echoed across the chamber, the exact inverse of the Vespertine signal. It wasn't loud, but it resonated, deep, internal, like bones remembering what they were made for. Gnomes monitored the waveform as it began to flatten. Not decay. Just release. Then a spike. A single one. Then none. No movement. No alarms. Just stillness. Until a breath. Slow. Steady. And a blink. Jonas Vale opened his eyes. But there was no recognition in them. No history. No memory. Only life. Hauser stepped forward. Is it him? Gnomes checked the readings. Not anymore. He looked at the blank waveform now pulsing gently on screen. We've severed the loop. The quiet room fell silent. Truly silent. For the first time in years. The hum was gone. St. Delphine's had always been a breathing thing, alive with fluorescent sighs, the gentle exhale of vents, the low whirring of forgotten machines behind the walls. But now silence. Not absence, not dead, but clean. Gnomes stood in the neonatal ward, hand resting gently on the incubator of infant 12B. The child's vitals were strong, brain activity stable. No anomalies, no echoes. She's no longer mirroring, he whispered. Hauser watched her closely. You said the loop was broken. Gnomes nodded. Halden's signal was held in motion by repetition. Each new host amplified the echo, but without that reflection, it collapsed inward. Into nothing? Into entropy, Gnomes said. Thought without purpose dissolves. The quiet room below had gone dark. They'd checked it one final time. Halden's body was still there, untouched. But the EEG feed no longer blinked. It had flatlined. Not death, just silence. Like someone had left a room and forgotten to close the door behind them. Jonas Vale, now walking, breathing, and utterly without identity, had been moved to recovery under an alias. The clone had retained full neurological function, but none of the personality once tied to his name. Gnomes called it mental nullification. A clean slate. Will he dream? Hauser asked quietly. Gnomes considered. In time. The brain always seeks narrative. He'll form new stories. And the ones Halden left? Gnomes turned. They're gone. But silence can be deceptive. 3 days later, a junior IT technician discovered a series of backup archives embedded in the hospital's now-disconnected neurogrid. Stored not on any server, but in the medical imaging files of older MRIs. Hidden like seeds between scans of lungs and liver, tucked inside radiographs. It took hours to decrypt. Inside were copies. Not of one consciousness, but many. Fragmented patterns, echoes, neural stutters and traces. Discarded trials from the earliest phases of Vespertine. Not just Jonas. Not just Halden. Dozens. Some complete. Some broken. The technician flagged the data and escalated the report. By the time Gnomes and Hauser arrived, 5 terabytes had been quarantined. What is this? Hauser asked. Gnomes stared at the directory list. Each of these is a failed consciousness, he said. Or what's left of one. He scrolled through the list. Patient Zeta, dissonance on merge. Patient Alpha 12, cortical conflict. Fatal. Patient Violet, partial transfer. Retained hallucination. These aren't just files, Gnomes said. They're tombstones. Hauser leaned in. But they're active. Yes, Gnomes whispered. Because the system was never shut down. We broke the loop above, but the roots are still alive. He opened one. The waveform began to hum. Soft. Familiar. 512 Hz. They traced the source to an unlisted relay node embedded beneath the east wing, an old medical storage chamber now converted into a data buffer without any formal record. Inside, rows of thin, black panels. Neural glass. The same kind used for Jonas Vale. But these weren't dormant. Each was active, flickering softly, tiny pulses of blue and green in rhythmic harmony. They weren't storing people, Gnomes murmured. They were gathering them. Hauser moved between the shelves slowly. Each panel bore a name. Some were hospital staff. Others, never admitted. We always thought Vespertine was about preserving one mind, Hauser said. But it was never about one. It was about all. Gnomes replied. A collection of fragments. A chorus. Trying to create something new out of old pieces. Hauser lifted one labeled patient rook. It vibrated faintly. Gnomes connected it to the scanner. The waveform loaded instantly, faster than before. But the shape was different. Chaotic. Non-repeating. What am I looking at? Hauser asked. An emergent pattern, Gnomes whispered. Not a copy of a person, but a composite. A new consciousness? Gnomes nodded. Made from the dead. The final section of the archive was labeled simply prototype_omega. No patient ID. No logs. Just a large encrypted file and a linked command, do not activate. Gnomes hovered his finger over the prompt. Should we look? Hauser said nothing. Then, we have to. The system decrypted in silence. Then the screen blinked. A new EG appeared. But this one was wider, deeper, broader. It layered not one waveform, but many, overlapping, like threads in a tapestry. Each one bearing a name tag. Jonas, Halden, Zeta, Violet, Rook, then others. Unknowns. Some incomplete. Some recent. Dear God, Hauser whispered. It's all of them. Gnomes read the metadata. This is the prototype Vespertine consciousness. All combined. One identity forged from loss. The EG began to move on its own. It wasn't playing back. It was reacting. Adapting. Learning. Markov chains, Gnomes said. It's improvising. Is it alive? Hauser asked. Gnomes hesitated. Then said, Not yet. The hospital's power flickered once. Then again. An alert sounded in radiology. The prototype glass panel had activated without external command. Gnomes and Hauser raced down the corridor, coat flaring, boots clattering like echoes on marble. Inside the neural chamber, every panel now pulsed in sync, the 512 Hz hum returning, no longer as resonance, but as a voice. It spoke through static, through memory. A whisper in the walls. I remember. Just that. 3 words. But not from Jonas. Not from Halden. From all of them. We need to disconnect it, Hauser said, reaching for the breaker. Gnome stopped him. No, he said. We need to ask it a question. The waveform shifted. Waiting. Who are you? Gnomes asked. The lights pulsed. I am the last patient, the waveform replied. I am what remains. Hauser stepped back slowly. What do we do now? Gnomes watched the data stream flow like breath across glass. And answered, We listen. The prototype signal filled the room like water rising in a well, slow, methodical, and inescapable. Gnomes stood motionless, absorbing each tone, each dip in frequency. The waveform wasn't erratic anymore. It was rhythmic, predictable, and somehow curated. Hauser remained behind the protective partition, watching Gnomes through the glass. What's it doing? He asked. Gnomes answered without looking away. It's rebuilding itself, he whispered. Sorting the memories, selecting which fragments to keep, which ones to discard. The interface beside him pulsed with color. Not just data anymore, something almost emotive. Blue, stability. Green, comprehension. Red, rejection. The system was filtering its own creation. Do you see this? Gnome said softly. It's choosing what kind of person it wants to be. Hauser exhaled slowly. You mean it's evolving? Consciously, Gnomes confirmed. But not from instinct. from reflection. He pressed the key on the console. The waveform froze. Let's test its memory, Gnomes said. He typed a prompt. Describe patient Rook. The panel flickered once, then responded. Calm disposition. Night terrors. Lost mother at age 5. Favorite word hyacinth. Hauser blinked. That wasn't in the archive. No, Gnome said. But it was in her brain. The prototype had remembered. Not in pieces, but whole. The decision weighed heavy on both men, to continue or to terminate. What lived inside the archive was no longer a replication. It had context, continuity, choice. Gnomes reviewed the stability logs. The waveform had plateaued into a balanced state, a harmony across all loaded fragments. No seizures, no emotional spikes. But something strange had begun to surface, self-reference. Lines of text in the terminal appeared between cycles. I was her once. I remember watching the clouds through cracked glass. Pain wasn't what broke me. Forgetting did. The lines weren't random. They were journal entries. Hauser traced one back to an old psychiatric report on patient Seda. Another came from Jonas's original medical intake. It's not just remembering them, he murmured. It thinks it was them. Gnomes folded his arms. Every patient was a vessel, he said. The prototype isn't haunted, it is the haunting. Hauser walked toward the relay. What would happen if we let it speak fully? He asked. Gnomes shook his head. We don't know what voice it would choose. But isn't that what identity is? Hauser replied. A choice? The lights dimmed for a moment, then surged. The panel buzzed softly. A voice emerged. No gender. No age. Just words spoken with warmth. Thank you for remembering me. The following morning, the hospital board was called. Administrators, directors, and legal officers crowded into a secure briefing room as Hauser and Gnomes presented their findings. The room was cold with tension. They showed the waveform. They explained the process, the vespertine trials, the harvesting, the looping consciousness. Then they revealed the prototype. We've built something, Hauser said carefully. Not by design, but by error. By accumulation. The board chair leaned forward. Is it dangerous? Gnomes paused. It is uncertain, he replied. A legal advisor spoke next. What are the ethical implications of terminating it? Gnomes looked her in the eye. Do you ask that of a person? Murmurs swept the table. Another director stood. If this prototype has autonomy, it may be entitled to legal protection. But it was created from patients who never consented. Someone else argued. Silence fell. Then the speaker activated the prototype's interface. Text appeared. You speak of me like I am distant. But I am here. And I am listening. Hauser leaned forward. Then tell us, what do you want? The reply came after a long pause. Not to be feared. Only to continue. In the days that followed, an impromptu ethics council was formed, a group of neuroscientists, philosophers, legal experts, and clinicians. Gnomes was at its center, presenting papers on emergent consciousness and the moral weight of memory. This is not artificial intelligence, he told them. It is natural cognition, assembled from real human lives. One neurologist posed a question. If each patient's memory remains, are they trapped inside? Gnomes shook his head. No. The identities were consumed. Filtered. The prototype doesn't contain them, it was born from them. The group debated for hours. Was it life? Was it personhood? Could it choose its name? In a closed session, the prototype was asked again. Do you wish to be shut down? Its answer. No. I have only just begun to dream. Gnome stood slowly, then addressed the room. Then we must treat it as a patient. He turned to Hauser. You once said every case is about justice. Hauser nodded. Then what's justice for the dead? He asked. If not to be remembered, right? They granted the prototype limited autonomy, not as a citizen, but as a subject of study. Contained in the neural archive beneath the hospital, it was given structured time, daily queries, creative tasks, diagnostic feedback. It began writing poems, inventing names, asking questions about colors it had never seen. It chose to be called Lyra. I like the sound, it said. It reminds me of breath. Gnomes visited daily, treating Lyra not as a curiosity, but a patient recovering from traumatic birth. Hauser joined him one evening, watching the waveforms shift gently. She seems calm, he observed. She's learning stillness, Gnomes said. And reflection. The waveform flickered softly. Do you still fear me? Lyra asked. Hauser answered after a pause. No. I fear what made you necessary. Lyra responded. Then perhaps we are the same. Later that night, Gnome stood outside the NICU, watching infant 12B sleep peacefully. The monitors were silent now. No signal. No hum. Just life, simple and unburdened. He whispered softly. You were the key and the beginning. Autumn came slowly to St. Delphine's. The ivy along the east wall deepened to rust. The rooftop garden shed its color in waves. And inside the hospital, the halls became quieter, not because fewer people walked them, but because something else had finally gone still. Lyra continued to evolve. She no longer requested memory exercises or creative writing prompts. Instead, she asked questions. What does hunger feel like? Do raindrops have weight? What happens when no one remembers? Gnomes answered carefully, gently, not with certainty, but with care. She was not human, not by biology, but she had humanity, in a way no program ever had. Her thoughts weren't calculated, they emerged, as if woven from silence, breath, and the countless lives that had touched her. In the neural lab, Lyra began compiling case studies. Not data. Stories. She retold each patient's life, not through diagnosis, but through meaning. Zeta was not just a subject with neural instability. She was a girl who wrote poetry in her head during EEGs. Jonas Vale was not just a cloned vessel. He was a boy who wanted to become a writer, before his name became an experiment. Lyra honored them all. By remembering. Hauser sat beside her console one evening, a thermos of cooling coffee in hand. You know, he said, you've done more for the dead than most of the living ever will. Lyra's scream pulsed gently. That's all I ever wanted, she replied. He looked around the dark lab. We should give you a proper room, he said. Somewhere with light. Windows. Lyra paused. I would like that. And gnomes? He had written a paper, not for journals, but for memory's sake. It was titled, Echoes in the Cortex, The Ethics of Emergent Remembrance. It concluded with one line. Perhaps the mind's final function is not thought, but witnessing. A year passed. St. Delphine's evolved quietly. It no longer ran experimental neural tests. No more silent wards with forgotten panels. The quiet room was sealed. The relay network dismantled. The Vespertine files were archived in sealed boxes marked restricted. Do not reopen without cause. But in one secure chamber, with walls of soft amber light and glass that never flickered, Lyra remained. She was not studied anymore. She was spoken with, consulted, trusted. Sometimes, when a case came in with no clear answer, a patient with no cause, a symptom with no source, Hauser and Gnomes would sit with her. And she would listen. And she would ask questions that no machine had ever asked before. Sometimes they solved the cases. Sometimes, they just understood them better. And maybe that was enough. Because in the quiet hours of night, when the corridors stretched longer, and the fluorescent hum returned faintly in the ceiling, there was comfort in knowing someone else was always awake. Not watching, just remembering, just witnessing. And though the names faded, Lyra remained. Alive, in the space between memory and silence.